Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review from the classic Goosebumps TV show from the 1990s. It's been a while since I've done one of these. And the episode I'm reviewing today is from season 3, and it is Awesome Ants. Yes, I know the DVD cover has the Headless Ghost, but on the back it has Awesome Ants, so I'll be referring to this for the review. Now, I have to say, I maybe watched this episode 1 to 3 times throughout the span of my life, watching the show at least. And I know the last time I watched this was when I did my TV show watch through before I got back into collecting and doing YouTube and stuff. And I don't remember being all that impressed with it, but coming back to it after being immersed into Goosebumps for quite a while now, like getting reacquainted with my childhood nostalgia, I have a huge admiration for this episode. Now, this episode was directed by a person named Don McCutcheon. I'm not familiar with the other episodes Don did for the show, but this was pretty well done. The effects were really good. The acting was, typical of the show. The setting, though, felt a little more intimate, felt a little more small, compared to other episodes. So for that, I think Don really nailed the aesthetic for something like this. That creature feature aesthetic that we see in like the Haunting Hour later on in some episodes is captured in here. It kind of feels like a long lost Haunting Hour episode, if I'm being honest. Something about it. It's adapting a short story. A lot of people don't know this. It's adapting a short story from the Tales to Give You Goosebumps series, book number 4. And I've reviewed that on my channel. And I remember it not being my favorite story in the book. I think when I reviewed it a long time ago, I said it was like one of my least favorites in the book, if not my least favorite. But over time, it has grown on me, and it's not quite my least favorite anymore. But seeing this, there are a lot of differences in this episode. And shout outs to Neil Shusterman, who wrote the script for this. The changes in this made it a lot more fun, captures that creature feature atmosphere. It's a very intimate, like I said, very intimate episode, and it's very easy to enjoy. So off the bat, if you have not watched this, I would definitely recommend watching this. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So in the episode, unlike the short story, Dave and his friend Ben are at this ice cream parlor, and they notice that there's ants all across the ice cream parlor. They brought their comics, they're sitting down trying to eat ice cream, and there's ants crawling all over their ice cream. And this freaks them out, and everybody skedaddles out of the ice cream parlor in a very dramatic fashion, very comical. And when they go outside, there's this fake out scene where this giant ant collapses on top of Dave. And it's revealed to be part of an exterminator truck from this guy named Mr. Lance. Mr. Lance is this kooky exterminator guy, and he accompanies them into the ice cream parlor and finds the nest in the wall and punches a hole and grabs the queen and squishes it, and there's like green slime coming out of it. It's really gross, very reminiscent of Monster Blood. I think that was kind of a nod to Monster Blood in that. And the exterminator guys telling him, like, you got to be careful with ants, and this kind of inspires Dave because he has a science project coming up in his class, and he looks down at his comic when he's talking to the exterminator and sees this ad in this comic book for Awesome Ants. So he's like, why not? It's only $5. He puts in a $5 order and mails it away. The very next day, this truck arrives and brings Dave this massive, ant farm to put in his backyard and some starter ants, and it comes with an instruction manual. And he's reading through the instructions, and it says you can only feed 1 blue pill a day to these ants. Don't feed them anymore. Do not overfeed them. So Dave obliges with that rule. And as the story goes on, his friend Ben visits one day, and the ants don't really seem to be all that active. Dave has been collecting data for his project. He wants to follow the rules to make sure nothing crazy happens. And of course, Ben encourages him to try to, feed the ants different foods to get them to do more things, kind of like the short story in the Tales Give You Goosebumps book. And when they start feeding them, they feed them like a worm, they feed them some old hot dogs, and these ants start to become more lively. They start to see that this food is disappearing. This is great information for the project. And later on, when Dave's looking at the manual, it says don't overfeed them. They have a chance to grow or something. And Dave capitalizes on this and uses that for his project. And when he reports in his project, these ants are like 3 inches, bigger than the world's largest known ant. And he gets an applause in his classroom after he presents his project. But the exterminator guy kind of laughs it off and says, hey, you know, what you just said can't be true. I mean, these ants shouldn't be real. The biggest known ant is less than 3 inches big. And Dave's like, well, you don't believe me, come see him. And later on, as the story keeps going, the ants continue to break out of the ant farm because they're getting too big and they need to go forage. This was also going on before Dave presented his project, mind you. And they've gotten so big to the point where it culminates into a part of the story where it gets really good. Let's just say that. So Dave's in his room and he's looking around. He sees holes in his wall. He sees these giant ants, which look fantastic. The practical effects on these look great. Very reminiscent to movies like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Have you ever seen that movie and seen the giant ant, how they made that look in that movie? It's spot on here. It looks fantastic. And he gets really creeped out and he gets chased out of his house. He's trying to look for his family. Nowhere to be found. He goes to the exterminator's place of business. Somehow he knows that. And this is where he encounters even larger ants. And it's very kooky, very science fiction. It kind of reminds me of something like an attraction you would see at like Universal Studios or something. Very, very cool. Like large ants coming to life. And there's a really creepy scene where this ant comes and grabs him with its like feelers or whatnot, or its mouth talons, and drags him in to this hole in the wall. And then it cuts into a scene where it's revealed that Dave is waking from a dream. Now this is the big twist of the whole episode. Now when he wakes up, he goes downstairs, everything seems normal, and he goes to eat breakfast, and everything isn't as it seems before, like it was in his dream. And he's starting to realize, oh, this must have been a really weird dream. And he goes outside, and he sees all these people shoveling these pills, or this food source. And there's a big revelation that happens with some nods to characters from his dream. And there's kind of a higher meaning and a message that that the episode gives off at the end, and then it cuts there. Pretty iconic too. So that in a nutshell is Awesome Ants, the episode. So to give a rundown on the positives I have with this episode, like I said, the person who directed it, McCutcheon, is that how you say his name? Don McCutcheon, did a fantastic job capturing that 50s sci-fi creature feature atmosphere. Kind of reminds me of this giant ant movie from the 50s called Day. Very well done. And also it reminds me of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which is one of my personal favorite childhood movies. So it really struck a chord with me. The exterminator person, Mr. What is his name? Lurtz, something like that. I just remembered it and I forgot it. He was great. He was very comical, very over the top, very entertaining. Kind of like the Elvis guy from, How I Got My Shrunken Head. Around this time of the show, it started getting really wild with its characters. And I think, there's some other things going on around this time, like on the network Fox Kids, that were probably influencing this over-the-top thing. Like Big Bad Beetleborgs were a thing, so if you were a fan of that, you probably would have got a kick out of this character. But yeah, he was really fun. Dave is kind of a, okay protagonist. Not really special or anything. Nothing really stand out. It's such a straightforward story. Its plot is very simple to follow. You don't have to go through emotions or anything. You're just watching to see what happens next. It's just one of those lightning-paced episodes. And for that, it works in that you don't have to get too invested into the characters, but you get really invested with the atmosphere and what's going on. And you get really invested into what the ants are becoming. And with that comes a message that very few Goosebumps episodes are able to put off in the episodes. One of the big ones is follow the instructions. There's instructions for reasons, and when you disobey instructions, you tend to mess things up. That's a very prevalent message in this, and it was also a prevalent message in the short story as well. But the changes the episode had were great. The opening act at the ice cream parlor was not in the short story. That was great. That was really fun. That was a good way to kick off the episode. The twist ending had a different flair to it than the short story. And I've grown more appreciative of the episodes that take the source material and do something different with it. I'm not necessarily looking for 100% accurate episodes, but I like the ones that take the concepts and kind of tweak it to make it its own thing. And it really did its own thing here. A lot of positives, but the negatives are pretty middle to high hitting here for me. It's a taste preference, all in all, when it comes down to this episode. I think the better episodes in the show have a more intimate fear than this episode is portraying. It's one of the sillier episodes, I would say. And in this episode, don't get me wrong, it's a great episode showing the capabilities of the production team making the show, and at the same time kind of highlighting how cheesy the show could be at the same time. But the cheese really takes it back. And I'm being honest, a lot of the best episodes, they have that balance of cheese. I feel like in this episode there was just a tad bit too much. Just a tad bit. Not if it was a little more ominous, if they played up especially the final act a whole lot more, I think this episode would have been a lot higher on my overall ranking when I ever get down to ranking every single episode in the series. I think this one would be a very, very high one. And it is a high one, to be fair. But the cheesiness really detracts the experience for me. I'm just being honest. And just another thing is how, like I said, you don't have to get invested into the plot. But I wouldn't say this episode is plotless, but it's just very basic. I love some basic stories in the show, like Haunted House Game. I've reviewed that episode. That's more of a basic episode, but it also had some very creepy stuff going on. A good amount of this episode was just a little cheesy, too basic, and not really capitalizing on the horror all that much. And also a side note, if you're not really afraid of bugs or anything, this episode might not do it for you. I'm just being honest. But I had a blast overall. With those negatives kind of piling on, the cheesiness and how basic the plot was, not capitalizing on the horror as much, I deducted basically a full point combined for those, about 0.5 each. It's a 4 out of 5. This is a very good episode, above average for the show. Very memorable for all the right reasons, not memorable for the wrong reasons. And that's good testament to this episode. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Awesome Ants, the episode. If you have not watched this episode, I highly recommend it. It's a fun time. If you don't like it, I can kind of see it, but I'd still recommend it. So that's my thoughts on Awesome Ants. Let me know down in the comment section if you have watched this episode. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.